Hello, my name is Katell Le Goulven. I'm the Executive Director of the Hoffmann Global Institute for Business and Society at INSEAD, promoting a vision of business that contributes to societal progress. And I'm delighted to welcome David Nabarro, Professor of Global Health at Imperial College. Welcome, David.
It's great to be here.
So David, you've been one of the architects and one of the promoters of the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted by the UN in 2015. It's an agenda that comes from the UN. So why do you think business should care? What's in there for them, and why should a business school care about the Sustainable Development Goals?
In 2000, world leaders got together and agreed for the first time to concentrate on certain areas when it came to supporting development, and they chose 8 areas, and they became what was called the Millennium Development Goals. They were very carefully chosen as areas where it would be possible to make a difference in poor countries, and they were due to stay in place until 2015. In 2012, world leaders came together and said, what are we going to do to plan for development for the next period between 2015 and 2030. And a different approach was adopted. Instead of focusing on things that could really be relatively easily achieved in poor countries, the world's leaders said, we want to focus on the issues that face everybody in our world, both now and in the future, bringing together environmental, economic and social issues all into one rubric. What we have, but as of 2015, September 2015, is something called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Built around 5 principles, it contains 17 goals and 169 targets, and it's the plan for the future of the world. And everybody who has an economic interest in what's going to happen in our world, anybody who's interested in the future and securing the future for coming generations, anybody who's interested in fairness and equality of opportunity, anybody who's interested in the environment really has to pay attention to this 2030 agenda, to its goals, and to what it means for the future of humanity.
So if, I'm in a business, I also need to make profits. I need to make sure that my business is viable. So what's the incentive for me to look at that agenda and consider it in my business plan? And how do you communicate with people who see these 2 objectives as antinomic and think that there is a trade-off between profit and contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals?
One of the big challenges for business people everywhere is to define what is a reasonable way in which to make money. Do I make money out of harming people? Do I make money out of not really doing any good for people? Do I make money out of doing good for people and creating a viable society for the future? Most businesses that are thinking long-term eventually come to the conclusion that it's not good for your market, it's not good for your bottom line to harm people. There are relatively few products that are made and sold by businesses that are harmful, but they do include tobacco products, they do include arms, and to a degree we now understand they include quite a lot of other things, like particularly unpleasant kinds of food. So more and more businesses that are active, working with large numbers of consumers, getting supplies from a variety of different supply chains, asking themselves, are we actually helping our consumers to live healthy, productive and sustainable lives? Are we actually helping society to be fit for future generations? Because they realize that there's no alternative way to make money. To make money in a way that is damaging society, to make money in a way that hurts people, is not good for the business in the long term. Some business leaders tell me that they believe they have an actually much more focus on the future well-being of people than heads of government do, because they say, we in business, we want to stay in business for 5, 10, 15 years. We've got our long-term horizons to look at. We want to make sure that we're developing the right kind of plant to service the markets in the best possible way. So we have to think long-term, whereas many government leaders are thinking the next election cycle, and often that's only 2 or 3 years when you take into account the re-election process. So I'm more and more seeing business leaders actually become leaders for sustainable development, because they see it in the interest of their business, of their employees, of their shareholders, of their customers, to actually be working for long-term sustainable futures for all. And they find their consumers love it and they make more money.
Thank you. So this agenda is rather broad. Huh? There are 17 goals, as you said, 169 targets, and they cover a wide range of topics that also can enter into conflict sometimes. What's your view on dealing with trade-offs across these goals? Because one company or one organization can decide to really steer their ship towards one goal, but forgetting the other ones. So how does that get reconciled? How do businesses deal with these trade-offs?
Let's start with the overall Sustainable Development Agenda and how it was constructed and why it's got 17 goals. Actually, the goals are not the main feature of this agenda. There are 5 principles that underlie the agenda that were pulled together by the governments that were negotiating. First, it's people-centered, and it's very much about leaving no one behind. Second, everything across these goals is interconnected. None of them really can be looked at in isolation. Third, that they are universal. They apply to everybody everywhere. There's not goals for the rich and goals for the poor. Fourth, when trying to address these goals, it's really important to integrate different parts of government and society together so they operate in a pretty seamless way. And fifth, you can only really get results on this agenda through partnering and working outside your comfort zones. These are the 5 big principles. They are the principles that I would encourage every business leader to look at, to engage with, and to embrace, because then within that, yes, we're dealing with the different goals, and they're interconnected, and there are trade-offs, but there's trade-offs in everything. There's trade-offs in all aspects of business work. There's trade-offs in our own lives and how we live our lives. There's trade-offs in government. And the trade-offs are part of normal work and action. And so learning to deal with the trade-offs inside the Sustainable Development Agenda is basically learning to deal with the trade-offs in life. It's normal for business, it's normal for government, it's normal for people, and I'm not scared of it. All I ask people to do is look at the principles. Those are the most important part of it. This is the only plan we've got for the future of the world, and if we buy into those principles, then we're going to be able, I believe, to have more profitable and more sustainable businesses that are better for people and better for the planet.
In terms of business engagement, what excites you the most at the moment?
In the shift from the Millennium Development Goals of 2000 to 2015 to the Sustainable Development Agenda 2015 to 2030, something very interesting happened. It was the recognition that you cannot deal with problems in society through linear responses where you've identified a problem, found a solution, and bang, you apply the solution to the problem and everything's better. In real life, it's not like that. You need a systems approach that looks at the interconnections between different aspects of society. One of the things that I've found business leaders are really good at doing is taking a systems approach to the challenges they face. We sometimes forget that because we've got an image in our mind that business is about identifying the product, developing the solution to getting that product up to a point where there's good margins and then selling it as many places as possible. But it's not like that. If you're in marketing, product development, sales, you are all the time thinking about how you are interacting with your product inside the complex systems within which societies function, within which your customers are working. So the fact that we've got a systems agenda and we've got businesses that take a systems approach to looking at how to develop their way of working actually means we've got a sort of really beautiful coming together of similar interests. And I believe that more and more businesses are finding the Sustainable Development Agenda makes sense to them. And they follow it with real interest instead of cherry picking individual goals, saying we're going to just deal with this, goal 1, goal 5, goal 7, goal 12. They actually deal with the whole totality of the agenda and engage with their customers, their suppliers, their shareholders, regulators, with that in mind. And once they start doing that, you get fabulous responses. You get businesses actually leading transformative change in places where governments or NGOs, as we call them, or scientists can only do part of the puzzle, but businesses, particularly when they work in groups, pre-competitively ideally, we get some fabulous results. I can tell you this is happening in food right now, it's happening in health, it's happening in urban planning, it's happening in rural infrastructure, it's happening in climate change, it's even happening in work for peacekeeping, where we found that businesses involved and coming into areas that are full of conflict and violence can actually have a very, very vital role in making things calmer and moving us towards a much better place.
So if you were to convey that passion and that excitement to students we have here at INSEAD, our MBA students, or different executives who come to INSEAD and want to contribute but don't really know where to start, because this is a big and bold agenda, what would be the 2 or 3 recommendations you would give them?
It's a very simple first maxim, which is start anywhere but follow your idea everywhere. And it's built around my idea that when you want to work on these complex issues, you absolutely have to take a risk and dive in, but then you connect until you find what the systems look like and you work with them. So get in there, get stuck in, see what it's like. Number 2, similar sort of vein, always make sure that people at the center are at the center, not just rich people or elite people who sometimes we tend to look at when we're thinking about people-centeredness, but everybody, people who are extremely poor, income poor, and who've got very few opportunities, as well as people who are well off. Put the people at the center. Number 3, and perhaps this is the most challenging, is use an interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder approach to what you're doing, and treat it as a systems issue, because very rarely when we're dealing with sustainability is there one simple solution to problems that society and humanity faces, and we actually have to work on these issues together. So forming collectives of people who will work on it as a systems issue is really, really helpful.
David Nabarro, thank you very much for joining us today at INSEAD.
Thank you.